All hyperbole aside, no model is really terrible. Famine is terrible, but models aren't terrible. They're just models. So you've been in the hobby for a little while now. You might not do. I don't know you. Personally, you might be new. If you're new here, hello, welcome. And you've been painting models for some time, and for some others, maybe even years, and you're looking at the models you've just painted, or an army you've just finished, and you're not happy. Why? Well, surprisingly, there's a lot of different reasons. A recently documented phenomenon, which is kind of mostly centered around video games, which kind of calls it's got a technical name, or a not technical name because it's not a recognized thing yet, but it is called the honeymoon phase. It's essentially the honeymoon phase of a thing you're into, which is you buy a game or you invest heavily into a hobby, and it's sold to you, the consumer, as something that is potentially a life-changing shift for you. And when it's not, there's a 180-degree emotional shift into complete black and white disenchantment. And who's to blame? Is it the kids or the parents that are letting them play Mortal Kombat, whatever? But really, there needs to be some sort of user-tempered expectation of reality. To a degree. And it's the same with this. Warhammers or the larger miniature painting hobby. You buy a starter set, you buy some basic paints, you start painting, you follow the tutorials, you get your head around what's supposed to be happening, and it just doesn't work, which sucks. But this isn't just you or me, this is a fairly common thing. After the great plastic rush of 2020, the amount of people that are now offloading their stuff, either because their interests have changed or because the experience isn't living up to the expectation. So before we start looking at any possible advice I might be able to convey, I just want to reiterate that this is all about internal voice. This is not what external persons say about your stuff, because unless the criticism is constructive, or most importantly invited, pay them bitches no mind. Yeah, ignore any comments unless it's look out for that falling piano, duck, mind that car. So my first bit of advice is to anyone who isn't happy with the painting and feels like it may have stagnated, is to expand your toolbox. And this is not your physical toolbox, although feel free to expand that. This is your you toolbox, because every person is basically a toolbox waiting to be added to. Which does sound a little bit on the wanky side, but if you've ever invested in a new skill set and noticed the influence on your existing skill set and things you like to do with that skill set, you'll probably know what I'm talking about. And if you've ever taken an interest in, say, like graphic design or photography or paper crafts, you'll kind of realize these skills are, not interchangeable, interskillable with other things. And that's not necessarily saying if you take a Photoshop course and you understand how color works in Photoshop, you're going to be immediately better at understanding paint colors, which, obviously there will be some bleed over from that. And for instance, if you take up photography, there's not going to be an immediate benefit to the framing and structure of your dioramas. But the simple act of doing more stuff and producing more materials and things is kind of a gateway into you understanding like a not self-reflection in a wanky spiritual sense, but just the ability to tell what you're putting out and whether it is of a quality. Perspective is the word. Back when I was doing music for movies and TV, the thing that was the most useful to me but took the longest time to develop was the perspective, and at the time, and I still call it my internal shit filter. Like, sit back, have a moment, have a coffee or a tea if you're a tea person, either look at the thing you've just made, or in my case listen to it, and give it a minute and honestly say to yourself, is this shit? And yeah, I still apply that filter now with the music I do here and there, and especially on the channel. And yeah, some of it has been shit, but I knew it was shit. I just still had to put it out. Now, I'm not saying that you definitely need an internal shit filter. Like, if this is your hobby, there's absolutely no need for you to put that kind of pressure on yourself. Like, just have a nice day of stamp collecting, open your stamp book and go, ah, this is shit. Of course, unless you need that kind of motivation and you have to treat all your hobbies like work or some other kind of ridiculous baggage, can relate.
What's up, guys? Tony D here, back in perpetual forward motion. You know, guys, with all this perpetual forward motion going on, I ain't got much time left in my day for web design. First world problems, am I right, guys? But the crazy cats at Squarespace hit me up with an offer I couldn't refuse. 10% off your first website subscription on the way. That's right. Not only am I saving nickels and dimes, I'm saving a bunch of time by building my website with the quick and easy, fresh and funky new templates that Squarespace already has working for me. Within just a few minutes, I can have a website ready for all my friends to see, all 2 of them. And that's not all. I've been thinking about selling some of the junk around here that D-Dog makes to make a little extra cash. And Squarespace comes with a preloader with all the good business to help you get an online store up and running and ready to trade. Already got an EPOS system in your existing brick and mortar store? No problem. Squarespace came packing with a fully realized EPOS integration system. And lastly, I want to talk about the Slam Dunkin' Browser Acquisition tab. That's right, guys. What do you do with your website once it's done? You gotta give it a name. That's right. We can use this tab to give our website any name we want. Slap a suffix on the end there, and we're ready to rock and roll. With our fresh and funky new website that everybody can find. So come on down to the Squarespace website warehouse and emporium, where we've got squares and spaces by the website for.
The best to you.
And every tool you add to the toolbox is going to be a little bit different. Everybody learns in different ways, which is why, for example, if you're watching a hobby tutorial and they say this is how you shade and this is how you highlight and this is how you finish it off, it might be something that you go away and it doesn't work for you. A, because you might need more practice, and B, it might just be the way that it's taught to you and the technique that is being used just doesn't work for you. I think the most useless tutorial ever would be, well, A, what is the best paintbrush to use, and B, how to hold a paintbrush. On what level would that actually resonate with maybe more than a dozen people? Maybe the paintbrush one would. A good paintbrush is a good paintbrush. For years, I tried to learn how to do edge highlighting, and no matter how many tutorials I watched with different perspectives, no matter how many times the motherfuckers said it was really easy, I just couldn't get it. I tried loads of different brushes, loads of different paints, loads of different consistencies. Just couldn't get it. Bought what they were using, bought more of what they were using, still didn't work, watched it again, nada. I generally just had to kind of abandon all that knowledge, pick up the paintbrush, experiment with thinning paints, and say, okay, with my hand, my weird MSE hand, what can I actually physically do? I kind of settled on what was contradictory to everything that I'd been taught through tutorials, which was, they told me to brush slowly with a very fine brush, and I brushed quickly with a very thick brush with a fine point. So it's kind of the opposite, really. And that's what worked for me. I've never had a good time with tiny brushes in any capacity or slow articulate movements. And there wasn't anywhere really accessible for me to learn that at the forefront of the algorithm. That could potentially be the way with you, the way that you're doing things. Again, if you are unhappy with your miniature painting, could you be applying it wrong? Could you have learnt the technique wrong, really? Wrong is not a good word. Could you have learnt a technique that isn't suitable for you, perhaps? Quite possibly you've outgrown that technique and it's time to learn something new to expand your palette. Keep in mind, everyone has their own idea of what they think is good and what is bad, and how good their paint jobs are. I would say, for example, these are fine, but I would like to learn more and apply new things to the next batch I do. It could be actual stuff that's the problem. I know that when I moved to Pro Acryl and Tooth and Coat paints, my painting got a lot more amicable. Amicable is definitely the word. And I guess that means, yeah, there is an element of expanding your practical toolbox as well. Trying new things doesn't really hurt anybody unless it's swallowing trees whole. Yeah, expanding your physical toolbox. I don't normally like to, recommend people go out and buy stuff because buying stuff never made anything better. Unless you've run out of bog roll. Please go out and buy more bog roll. But if you're not getting along with a certain type of paint, then there's no harm in potentially addressing that and picking up some samplers of other kinds of paint and having a go with them and see how you feel with them. While I'm in the fortunate position of being sent new types of paint and paint lines to try, I'm also in the unfortunate position of having bought complete paint lines for paint lines that I no longer use, and I realise they're just not for me. The original paints I used aren't bad paints as such or anything, there's not really anything wrong with them. I just found it was more difficult for me to articulate what I was trying to communicate onto a physical model with those paints, which I didn't know at the time, but hindsight's a wonderful thing. Another thing which I've kind of stumbled upon in various creative professions and pursuits has been the obsession with ritual. You've seen someone doing it a certain way, or someone teaches it a certain way, or you see everybody doing it a certain way, and the way they do it is now doctrine. What it might be, once again assuming that you are here because you're unhappy with your painting, is not so much ritual and method, it's stagnation. That ritual is someone else's ritual, and the success of it is based around the success that they've had operating with their own skill set and parameters. There was a lot of times during the course of music production where we would just bin off the ritual because it seemed completely pointless with unnecessary steps. Like there'd be guys who had obsessed over collecting rack units or their valve distortion units and absolutely multi-band compressing the fuck out of every snare hit. And it was my buddy Tom who actually just shunted all of the drum tracks through one bus and literally put a plugin on it called Sound Goodizer, and we had an actual decent drum bus in about 15 minutes. Not the best it could be, obviously, but it was better than the same drum track that the other guy had done, and it took him 2 weeks to do. So, yeah. And all because the reverence these processes often receive is just an artificial construct to raise the bar of entry. Pretty much. Maybe. I don't fucking know. And not to shoot on Games Workshop, even though they did kick John Chump Change's dog.
So I was walking my dog the other day, and Games Workshop came over and just kicked my dog.
They teach you how to paint a specific way, but they also sell paints. In the same way that the man who told us breakfast was the most important meal of the day, his last name was Kellogg's. Desmond Kellogg's. So getting rid of the ritual, in my mind, is one of the most liberating things you can do for your brain, especially if you feel like you're stuck in a corner or you're stagnating and you're not happy with your results. If you're not happy with your painting, what's the risk in just having a go at something different? When my MS first flared up, I didn't really have a choice in whether I stuck to the ritual or not. I just basically had to abandon it and find new ways to address it at the time and to future-proof myself for when my body eventually eats itself alive. And after a few months of doing these methods, which most of this stuff is painted with, I thought to myself, why the fuck didn't I do that earlier? If I'd have known I could have painted this tank in an hour with a brush from Poundland, I'd have fucking done it. And lastly, which is essentially just a rewording of what I've already said, is to absolutely try something new. And by that I mean models, game systems, glues, brushes, lights, workstations, posture, different chair. Yeah, different chair, honestly. If you can switch some things out that are just physical objects, well, that's pretty good for you. The worst thing is when you're unhappy with the thing and you can't change the thing. It's the same as trying a new skill set out. If you're trying new models, scratch bashing things, 3D printing parts, getting into 3D printing and taking a look at things up close in CAD, or just making some folding cardboard buildings, they're all skills that are useful in the hobby and develop you as a toolbox. And it's them within the same playground. It's nothing as scary as photography, and photography is fucking scary. Videography and photography, very different, very terrifying. Don't know how to take pictures yet. So yeah, just something like changing the brushes that you use, changing your desk lighting, which changing your desk lighting is quite possibly the most underplayed revolutionary thing you can do for your hobby space. Wow. Or something as simple as switching out layering for stippling, like I did on these guys. all of these little changes can maybe get you somewhere differently, somewhere a little bit faster, and it's a nice little dopamine hit when things start to work, especially when you try them for the first time. Not that it always does. A nice little dopamine boost, and as far as I'm concerned, if I enjoy the process, then I enjoy the end product that little bit more. Thank you for watching. I did try and do this a little bit less structured, so I kind of just went off on weird tangents about whatever. I've got quite a lot of stuff on at the minute. I've got to get a backlog of videos done for when I go away to Japan, and I have other jobs on which also need starting and finishing. So the next couple of months of videos are going to be a weird mishmash of talking heads, wrapping up old projects, and God knows what. Thank you to my wonderful Patreon community. This is actually something that I noticed you guys discussing a couple of months back, and I took some notes, and I finally put a little bit of a guide together for, stuff that you discussed that I'm now discussing. And like with a lot of discussion topics that I do like this, they are absolutely open for discussion. I am but one perspective in a giant ocean of many perspectives. So please, if you have a comment to make or suggestion, or just let me know how you feel about any of this stuff, let me know in the comments down below. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe. Cheers. I'm out of here.